Chapter 14. A light rain gently wet the city of Abuja that particular Saturday morning, exactly 2 weeks after Onochie told his children about his proposed marriage to Ogadinma. There was a feeling of newness and smell of freshness in the air. It was as if the rain had come to wash away the old, so the new could begin. That morning, Onochie had stood at his favorite spot in the house, the balcony of his room. He watched as the rain fell gently, the sun having taken refuge behind the silver clouds, making room for the rain to shine for the moment. Onochie looked at the weeping sky and began to pour his heart out to God. Taking a deep breath, he whispered, God, I don't really know what to expect on this journey, but I choose to trust you, Lord. His first marriage had been based on love. He had met Pamela at a family function when he had traveled to the village for Christmas, and it had been almost love at first sight. They had both loved each other deeply, and they had a good marriage. Lord, you see my heart, and you know that I truly want to honor you. Please grant me the wisdom, patience, and grace to love her as you do. He continued to say this prayer, which already had become his daily confession since Ogadinma agreed to the marriage proposal. A gentle breeze blew as he ended his prayers, and almost immediately, the gentle dripping of the rain stopped. The sun weakly smiled through the clouds in readiness for his own time of shining. Onochie turned and purposefully walked back to the room. He went straight to his bedside table, picked the picture frame that had always been there for as long as he could remember. It was a picture of Pamela in her wedding gown some 7 years ago, gently tracing her face with his hands. Onochie whispered and said, Pam Pam, I know I said goodbye some 3 years ago, but here I am saying another goodbye. He swallowed hard as his throat constricted. Probably a final goodbye. Now, because it's time for me to start again. He took a deep breath, cleared his throat, and then continued. Pam, goodbye. Continue to sleep easy, my first love. He brought the picture to his face and kissed it. He stared long at it as if to etch her image permanently in his mind. He then moved to the larger frame with the picture of both of them that was hung on one of the walls of the room. Taking both picture frames, he walked with long strides to Deborah's room. Onochie quietly brought out one of the suitcases that he had set aside to keep some of Pamela's stuff that the children may want to have as a reminder of the memory of their mom. He went about this quietly so he wouldn't wake his daughter, who was still sleeping. By the time he returned to his room, the sky was shining bright with white and blue clouds sprinkled across the sky with the golden rays of the sunlight. A knock sounded at the door. It was Temison. He and his family had spent the night in his house. How are you? Temison asked as soon as he entered at Onochie's call to come in. Onochie looked at his friend. Onochie knew he wasn't asking the regular question of how he was doing, but how he felt about remarrying. Afraid, excited, normal, I don't even know. The only thing I know is that this is what God will have me do. Temison moved closer to him, clapped him on his shoulder. That is more than enough then. Our obedience is all God needs. Come on, let's get the groom ready for his bride, he said with excitement in his voice as he patted his friend's shoulders. Onochie grinned and asked, what about the children? Nancy and your mom will take care of them. Get into the bathroom, husbandman. Meanwhile, in the Okoro's household, there was frenzy as the ladies were rushing to get dressed. Zarachi, who had passed the night at her old home, had to act as a timekeeper. Makeup artist, it's okay, oh, let the bride get dressed, she told the makeup artist, who was still working on Ogadinma's face. Mrs. Okoro, dressed in the native Igbo attire of silver blouse, on double wrappers, was waiting with Zarachi in the sitting room when Ogadinma and Uzoma, who was a bridesmaid, came out of the room. Hey, Omalicha, Ego Ibo, Achalugomwa. Her mother hailed her as she walked with her limp to where Ogadinma stood beaming. Her white ball gown had a heavily fitted beaded bodice. She looked like a princess. A tiny tiara and short veil made her pretty oval-shaped fair face more accentuated, and her pretty dimples deepened as she smiled at her mother's hailing. Hey, Ogadinma, you look so beautiful. Auntie Ngozi, who just joined them in the room, said. Thank you, ma, Ogadinma said. You are beautiful, Zarachi said, giving her a quick hug. Ogadinma quickly held her as she wanted to pull away. Zarachi, I am getting married, she whispered like a scared child to her sister's ears alone. Even though they had spoken about it as they slept in the room overnight, Zarachi knew this was a huge step for Ogadinma, who had vowed never to get married. Yes, and you will be fine, Zarachi whispered back before pulling back to look at her. So Ogadinma is truly getting married. Hey, God is indeed a wonder-working God. What happened to I will be the old maid to be keeping Zarachi and Uzoma's husbands in check? Uzoma teased. You keep quiet there, Auntie Ngozi said. Nne, you look so beautiful. I think Onochie has to add to the bride price he paid. See beauty now, but you girls are all fine. My sister born fine girls, oh, Auntie Ngozi praised them. Ngozi, thank you. Thank you for all you do for me and the children, Mrs. Okoro, who had turned to face her cousin, said in an emotionally laden voice. Mrs. Okoro hugged her cousin, who was more like a sister. Both women clung to each other. I am forever grateful that you are alive to witness their days of celebrations. What if that accident had claimed your life? Ha, Ngozi, I thank God. Oh. Ekene dili chuku, Mrs. Okoro replied. Okay, let's leave, oh, Zarachi exclaimed. Her phone rang. It was Auntie Rachel. She had left for the venue earlier with Auntie Ngozi, but stayed back with her fam to ensure the reception was decorated. Auntie Rachel says we need to start coming, Zarachi called out after she finished with the call. Are we not praying? Auntie Ngozi asked. Auntie, we prayed when we woke up this morning, Uzoma quickly said. Prayer is never too much. Let's quickly say a word of prayer, Auntie Ngozi insisted. Auntie Ngo, I will pray, Zarachi said impatiently. She quickly said a short prayer to the relief of her sisters, who didn't want their aunts to start with her long prayers. After the prayer, Uzoma handed a bouquet of flowers to Ogadinma, and they all moved out to the vehicles that were to take the bride and her family to church. Uzoma was in a car with Ogadinma and their mother, while Zarachi and her aunts were behind in Zarachi's car. Not too long into the journey, Ogadinma's phone rang. Hello, how are you? Hello, I am fine, she stuttered. Are you? I just wanted to share with you a word that God dropped in my heart this morning. He said, be still and know that I am God. Onochie told her over the phone. Be still and know that I am God, she repeated. Yes, I hope that helps. Ogadinma took a deep breath. Yes, thanks for sharing. I feel a lot better. Where are you? She asked. He informed her that he was already waiting in the church, and Ogadinma told him they were almost at the church. When she ended the call, her mother looked at her, took her hand in between hers, and smiled. Ogadinma, my child with the lion's heart. From a young age, I've seen you take on tasks with so much bravery that I often wonder where you got your courage from. Marriage is a big step, and one that I will never ask you to take if I wasn't sure that this is what God wants for you. Now, I won't ask you to be brave, but I would rather ask you to be patient, wise, and always seek God's face in this journey of marriage. Just keep your gaze on Jesus. Her mother spoke to her quietly, so that her sister and the driver in front would not hear. Ogadinma, too emotional to speak, just looked at her mother and nodded. She rested her head on her mother's shoulder like a little girl. And so, on that beautiful Saturday, after the downpour, Ogadima walked down the high in company of her sisters, mother and Deborah, her soon-to-be stepdaughter, to stand beside Onochie. Daniel stood beside his father, while Deborah stood beside her on the other side. Temison was his best man, while Uzoma was beside him, directly behind Ogadima. Onochie smiled as he looked at her. "You look stunning," he whispered. Ogadima smiled shyly and muttered, "Thank you." It was a short and beautiful ceremony. The guests were entertained in the youth hall of the church, and Ogadima was surprised at the number of guests that turned up for their wedding. Some were Onochie's business associates, his church members, his family members, and mother's friends from church. A few handful friends of ours from the university and the church. Her sisters, her aunts Rachel and Ngozi, and few staff of Honors Electronics. The reception wasn't elaborate, but it was top-notch, from the entertainment of the guests to the cutting of the simple but classy 3-tier cake. The couple was seated and the MC asked the guests to bring their gifts forward. Two people, after dropping their gifts, turned and quietly walked up to them. "They are Pamela's brother and sister," Onochie quickly whispered before they got to them. Ogadima was momentarily confused as to whom Pamela was, but almost immediately remembered that Pamela was his late wife. The man and woman greeted them warmly, and Onochie did the introductions. They exchanged pleasantries, and just before going back to their seats, the lady gently grabs one of Ogadima's hands. "Please take care of our sister's children. Please," she muttered emotionally, with tears in her eyes, as her brother nodded sorrowfully. Ogadima stood up and wrapped her arms around the lady, who was now sobbing gently. "Don't worry, I will take good care of Deborah and Daniel. I promise you that," she told her. Chioma, Pamela's sister, pulled out of Ogadima's arms and said, "Thank you. We don't stay in Abuja, but we would like to call once in a while so we can speak with the children and even visit, if that's okay with you." "That's fine by me, as long as their dad agrees," Ogadima replied. "Thank you," both visitors said before moving back to their seats. "Thanks for being nice to Chioma and Jude," Onochie said to her when she sat back on her seat. "Nice is the humane thing to do. I couldn't imagine if it was any of my sister's children. They will surely be living with me," Ogadima replied passionately. Onochie smiled at her. The event eventually came to an end, and Onochie announced that they were leaving. Though Temison said the twins could pass the night with them, Ogadima insisted that they would go home together as a family. Meanwhile, Onochie's parents insisted on staying at a hotel overnight before going to board a plane back to Anambra the next day. Onochie noticed that Ogadima was teary as her mother and sisters and aunts hugged and prayed with her. Ogadima clung to her mother for a long time. Auntie Rachel eventually broke the hug gently as she informed mother and daughter that a new family was waiting for her. Both of them disengaged, but still didn't stop other rounds of hugs, prayers, and well wishes from both families and a few friends still there at the reception. Eventually, the couple was released and they left with their children to start a new life together. Chapter 15. Onochie put the car into park and turned to look at his bride. He smiled and said, "Welcome to your new home." "Thank you," Ogadima said shyly. Their gazes locked. Ogadima quickly looked away when Onochie smiled at her. She turned to look at the children at the back. They were fast asleep. "Don't worry, I will bring them in," Onochie said as he followed her gaze. "No, I will carry one and you can carry the other one," Ogadima said. Onochie looked at her and dragged his eyes all over her wedding dress. "I don't think so. Both of you will probably end up on the floor," he said with a smile on his face. They disembarked from the vehicle to the congratulatory greetings from the security personnel. "Thank you, Sam," Onochie said. Ogadima also thanked him. Moving closer to Ogadima, Onochie, with a hint of pride in his voice, said, "This is my wife. I know you will accord her the same respect you give me." "Yes, so, Oga, Madam, you are welcome, ma." He greeted Ogadima with a respectful bow. "Open the boot and bring down the suitcases," Onochie said to Sam. The suitcases belonged to Ogadima. Uzoma had helped her to load them earlier in the day when the vehicle had arrived to pick her at home. "You can go upstairs. I will join you soon," Onochie said to Ogadima, handing her the keys to the house and showing her the one that opened the main door. When she got to the sitting room upstairs, she stayed there confused, not sure what to do next. Soon, Onochie came in with Deborah, whom he took to her room. Ogadima quickly moved to help undress her and tuck her into bed. When she finished, she saw Onochie coming out of Daniel's room. "Don't worry, I've tucked him in," he informed her as she tried to enter the room. "Let me get your stuff," he added after discarding his navy blue suit and rolling up the sleeve of his white wedding shirt. Ogadima sat down on a chair in the sitting room. After 3 trips, all her bags and suitcases were already upstairs. She stood and thanked him. "You're welcome," he replied. An involuntary yawn escaped Ogadima's mouth. This made Onochie chuckle. "Wow, someone is tired. It's actually been a long day. You should go and rest." "Where do I sleep?" she asked in uncertainty. "There are 5 rooms up here. Of course, the twins have occupied 2, and me 1. But you can stay anywhere you feel you will be comfortable in," Onochie said cautiously. "Okay," she whispered, nodding her head. She looked around and realized that there were 5 doors opening to the sitting area. "That's my room," Onochie pointed at the master's bedroom that was to the far left of the twins' rooms. "I will take that one," Ogadima quickly said as she pointed at one of the 2 doors facing the twins. "Okay, let me help you take your suitcase," he offered. "No, thank you. You have done more than enough. I can carry them," she said a bit louder than she should. Onochie, who had bent over to pick the suitcases, gradually stood upright. "Well, we may be married only on paper, but as much as I can, I will live up to my responsibilities as a husband. And part of them is to help you, and also to ensure I make life a lot easier," he said assertively. He smiled a little to soften his tone, and then bent again to pick up 2 of the largest suitcases at once. Ogadima followed him into the room, carrying one luggage bag. It was a beautiful room, painted in lemon and white, with a larger bed. One side of the room had the wardrobes, and opposite the wardrobes was the bathroom. She smiled her thanks as he brought in the last suitcase and bags. "What will you eat?" he asked. Now Ogadima wanted to scream, like she wasn't an invalid that needed to be waited upon. So why was he being unnecessarily nice? She was finding it a bit patronizing. "I am okay for now," she replied with a stiff smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Okay, but let me know if you need anything," he added before shutting the door after him as he exited the room. "Finally," she muttered before falling tiredly in a clumsy heap on the bed, still in her wedding dress. "Thank God, I can finally breathe," she muttered again as she let out air from her mouth in relief. The day was surreal, almost as if it was someone else that wedded and she had just been looking in on it. Because seriously, how could she, Ogadima, have gotten married? She thought again as she had been doing all day. Sitting up amidst the silk and chiffon of the wedding gown, Ogadima tried to cast her mind back on the ceremony of the day. She didn't know how long she sat in thoughts before she started feeling hot and uncomfortable in the wedding gown. She had decided to rent instead of buying a new one. She stood, located the switch, and turned on the air conditioner. She then proceeded to unzipping her wedding gown, but it was not to be. She stretched and strained to locate the complicated zip. She moved to the mirror that was on one of the doors of the wardrobes, trying to use it as a guide to unzipping the gown. But all her effort was futile, as her hand was not reaching the intricately designed zip on the wedding gown. "God, please," she whispered tearfully. "Hey, God, who sent me?" she asked after more futile efforts. "Who do I call now?" she thought. "Who, except Onochie?" a voice said. God forbid, she exclaimed. Her butt hit the bed heavily. She was totally befuddled as she kept muttering, God help me, God help me. The inner voice came to her again. Well, the only help you will get here and now is from Onochie. She felt like sobbing and wished she was back at home with Mama and her sisters. I don't even want to be married anyway, she whispered angrily to the empty room childishly. She crawled and coiled up on the bed like a fetus. Frustrated tears rolled down her face as she lay like a ball on the bed. I just want to go home. I don't want to be married to anyone. She kept crying, and all tears rolled down her eyes before the warm arms of sleep gradually enveloped her. Meanwhile, Onochie, who had stood on the balcony of his room, was busy praying and thanking God for their wedding, his new wife, and his children. He prayed for quite some time before going back to his room to shower and lay on the bed. Sleep was far from his eyes as he thought about the fact that he was married, but not actually married. He hoped she wasn't hungry, he thought, as he stood to help himself to some biscuits and water in the small fridge in his room. He munched while scrolling through his phone. Some of the people who attended their wedding had sent him some of the pictures they took. He smiled as he looked at them. He was sure the professional photographer he had hired would do a better job, but he was glad for the friends who had taken the pictures. He chose one where Ogadinma had smiled as they cut the wedding cake. Her eyes twinkled and her dimples could be seen. Onochie's smile was huge as he used the picture to replace the one he had on his WhatsApp profile. He was sitting on the bed, about to lie down again, when he heard a faint knock at the door. He was almost sure it was Daniel, only that he won't knock. It was Daniel who usually woke up at midnight, and Daniel never knocked. He had spoken to him about it several times. He just wouldn't do that simple act. The knock came again, a bit louder. He stood up and said, "Come in," while walking to the door. The door opened slightly, and he saw the gown before the face. It was Ogadinma. "Hello," she said timidly as they stood face to face at the door. "Ogadinma, what's wrong? Are you ill?" he asked in concern. "No, I am not. I just need a little help," she stuttered. "Yes, what can I do for you?" She looked away as she quickly blurted, "I need help to unzip my gown." There was absolute silence in the room. Onochie quickly put his stuff together. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't even ask why you are still in your wedding gown," he said hoarsely. Ogadinma nodded. "I couldn't reach it, however hard I tried." "Okay, can you turn around?" Onochie asked politely. She looked at him, and he could see confusion mixed with a little fear in her eyes. Onochie looked at her without any emotions. Ogadinma swallowed hard, nodded, and slowly turned her back to Onochie. Onochie could see why it would have been impossible for her to unzip it herself. He held the gown by the collar, and his hand brushed against her fair skin. A tingling sensation went from his hand through his whole body at the touch. He quickly put a rein on his thoughts and managed to zip down the gown. Her back was much fairer than her face, and the white bra she wore glistered against her skin. "I am through," he muttered huskily as he quickly stepped away from her. She swung around sharply, gave him a plastic smile, and thanked him before walking with her back out of the doorway, shutting the door behind her with a bang that reverberated through the whole house. Onochie moved to the bathroom to take another shower, this time a cold one. The next morning, Ogadinma sat nursing a cup of coffee on the island of the spacious and modernized kitchen. She loved the kitchen already. It was far bigger than the tiny one in her former home. Just as she thought of this, Onochie's voice came back to her. "Welcome to your new home." This was now her home, she thought. Her hands shook slightly as the scenario in his room the previous night popped up in her mind. "You are here?" The object of her thoughts said from behind her, and she turned around sharply on the kitchen stool. It was an awkward moment as they both stared at each other. "Good morning," she muttered, trying to stand up. "Please sit," Onochie said, waving her back to her seat. He moved to sit on another stool by the island. "I was knocking on your door, but when I didn't get a response, I decided to check around the house." "Hope you had a restful night," he asked. "It was good," she murmured with a nod. "That's good," he replied. They both stared at each other briefly. "Here, this is my part of the agreement. 20% of Honor's holdings is yours. My lawyer has drafted it, and it just needs your signature on it," he said, slipping a folder across to her from his own end of the table. Ogadima, who had her cup lifted to her mouth, gently put it down. A gaze slipped from his face to the folder. "Take a look at it. I have kept my part of the agreement too," he said simply. Ogadima picked the blue folder. She opened it and quickly scanned through the documents. "So you sign here, here, and here." Ogadima could feel his musky breath on her right ear as Onochie moved a little closer to show her where to sign the documents. Ogadima suddenly felt like a fraud. Did she really need to do this before she could care for the children? She thought. "Can I peruse this some more before signing?" she proposed. "Oh, sure, take your time," he said with a gentle smile. The air in the room suddenly switched as they both gazed for some tense moments. Ogadima was the first to look away. She shifted her gaze back to her cup of coffee that has now become tepid. "I suppose we can't make church service again as the children are still sleeping. Can we take some time to pray?" Onochie asked. Ogadima nodded in agreement before she confirmed her willingness. They moved to the small sitting room downstairs, and Onochie led the prayer sections. He thanked God for their wedding, their union, their new home, their children, their businesses, and the Church of God. Ogadima was relieved when Deborah came to interrupt, and Onochie had to round up the prayers. Daniel soon joined them. "Auntie Dima, you are here," Daniel whispered as he hugged her. "Yes, I am there." "I didn't see you. I thought you had left," he said pitifully. Ogadima's heart suddenly seemed constricted by the weight of his words. She hugged him fiercely. She pulled back to look at him. "No, I am not leaving. This is my home now, and we are all staying together." Deborah, who was sitting on her father's lap, yelped and hurriedly climbed down from her dad's lap. She ran to Ogadima and tried to push her brother away so she could be folded in Ogadima's arms. "Easy, Deborah. My hands can actually go round both of you." She pulled Deborah into her arms. "See, I can hug both of you," she said amidst laughter at the twins' antics. The three soon started a kind of game of best hugs. Onochie, who had woken up with some doubts as to the wisdom in having a marriage of convenience, looked at the trio with joy and satisfaction. Whatever happened between him and Ogadima was a different kettle of fish, but he knew he had done the best for his children by marrying her.